Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming along tonight to this ACRS New South Wales chapter event. My name's Michael Timms. I'm the New South Wales chapter chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank Tasha, Prabhakar and David Wake on here, who have teammates from the chapter who have put this whole show together. There's been quite a lot of work go into it. We have four wonderful speakers who Tasha will introduce shortly. And thanks also to Transport for New South Wales, who have provided this venue for us. It's very much appreciated. Acknowledge in the room tonight we have Mr. Bernard Carlin, PSM, the Chief of Road Safety in New South Wales, and I thank you, Bernard, for your ongoing membership and support of road safety. It's been a very tough year for us at ACRS and for the Centre of Road Safety. We'll talk about that more later in the AGM component of the night. Firstly, before we begin, we'll acknowledge country and pay our respects to the First Nations of Australia as well as the Maori in New Zealand. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people bear a high burden of road trauma and are nearly 3 times more likely to die in road crashes than other Australians. They're also disproportionately affected, represented in passenger and pedestrian fatalities. Certainly a lot of more work to be done in that space. So to our live audience, please help yourself to some snacks during the evening. Everything up the back must go. I've got some doggy bags, lady. You can take stuff home. To those of you online, look, rest assured that you're not missing out on an 8-course degustation. When you see the red ink in the finance report, you'll understand why. So I'll hand over at this point to ACRS New South Wales Deputy Chair, Dr. Tasha Prabhakar, who is your host for the Behind the Data Forum.
Hello everyone, and thank you again for being here today, both in person and virtually. Welcome to all the people virtually. We're delighted to have you here today to look behind the data. What new insights from safety, no blame crash investigations, in-depth crash investigations and crash analysis can help to improve road safety outcomes? Now, taking on board Treasurer Jim Chalmers' exhortation that productivity is the it word, I asked Microsoft Copilot this question. And within 1.2 seconds, Copilot explained that independent, no-blame investigations are revolutionary and will improve road safety and gave me a list of reasons why. In fact, Copilot seems to have already extended the remit of the New South Wales Office of Transport Safety Investigations, and Jim's team already seems to be running these investigations on our network. So job well done, Jim. But the challenge that I would like to pose for our presenters and to you, the audience here tonight, is to do better. Let's be cleverer and more innovative than AI. Let's turn our passion for road safety into ideas that we should seriously consider. Let's be inspired in the next hour or so. So today it's my great pleasure to welcome an awesome lineup of experts in this area. You're really in for a treat. They're experts looking behind the data. We have Jim Modrouvanos, who will tell us about no-blame safety investigations to get us thinking about how this could be considered in the road safety context, as has been advocated by the College of Road Safety and others. We will consider the insights from current road safety approaches to in-depth crash investigations from Inspector Hogan and big data road crashes and crash analysis from Emma Shearer. And finally, Professor Julie Brown will consider what we can learn from the perspective of a public health model. So let me tell you how we're going to run this forum. We expect the forum to take about an hour and 15 minutes, and we'll conclude the forum by around 6:25. Each speaker will present for about 10 minutes, and after the presentations, we will have a general discussion. It's an opportunity for questions from the audience. So to the audience here and to those online, please be thinking of questions as we go along and note them down. And if you are online, please put them on the online chat. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Jim Modrouvanos. Jim is CEO and Chief Investigator at the Office of Transport Safety Investigations, or otherwise known as OTSI. Jim has over 30 years' experience in the New South Wales Transport Public Service, encompassing senior executive roles in the areas of operational technology, rail engineering, asset management, safety systems, system assurance, freight and industry regulation. Jim has qualifications in engineering and public administration and has been serving as CEO and Chief Investigator since September 2023. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
Thank you, Tasha. Thank you, everyone. And in terms of your AI question, just bear in mind that, and the other thing that AI is famous for is hallucination. So you need to check and double check everything that it tells you. No blame investigations. I think the title is a bit of a giveaway. There's a couple of topics I'll cover today. Don't freak out. There's not that many slides. These are just the overview, and there's a few of these slides that bring it together. So at OTSI, what do we do? So we undertake no blame investigations into accidents and incidents. So we operate in the passenger transport space. So we're looking at, as you can see there, railway, buses that have more than 8 adults in them, and ferries, railway passenger services, as well as the broader railway construction and related sort of maintenance activities, etc. So we have a number of different functions. We can undertake no blame investigations. So that's a full investigation that you might see published on our website. We also have the function to review operator reports. So instead of investigating, we can call for the operator's report. So we can look at what investigations the operator's done into a particular incident, and we can provide them with feedback or coaching or whatever the case may be to improve their capability. We also have a confidential safety information reporting scheme that we administer. So people providing transport services out there can, if they see a safety situation that they're concerned about, confidentially report it to us, and we will look at it and, if necessary, investigate. In some cases, some of the issues that get reported to us are not ones which we'd investigate, but we act as a bit of a go-between to connect parties together and sort out the situation. Like one example is we had a situation at Manly where we had a lot of kids jumping off wharves in front of ferries. So it was a big issue, couldn't be resolved. Subsequently, it's been resolved by connecting various parties together to improve security and try to prevent that from happening, for example. We also analyse data and undertake research. So we collect a lot of information about incidents, and sometimes it's not about an individual incident, it's more about a pattern that we see emerging, and we might look at that as well. And we share safety lessons everywhere we can, including events such as this one today. So we sit within a pretty significant ecosystem. So you've got ministers, you've got service providers within that. So Transport for New South Wales wears quite a number of hats in the ecosystem in terms of contracting services, in terms of itself being a regulator in various capacities. We've also got other regulators that operate in the space, like AMSA, the maritime regulator, ONSA, the rail regulator, the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, and other entities that have regulatory type functions like the police and safe work and people like that. So there's an environment of businesses, regulators, and ourselves as the no blame regulator in New South Wales. So just to emphasise, I am not a regulator. I do not have regulatory powers. I do not have any of the coercive powers that a regulator would have to instruct people to do things. I produce recommendations. So my role is to identify improvements in the system, largely built around prevention, so incidents don't happen again. So our investigative approach, we have an approach that's been developed over the 20-year life of the office. So we've just celebrated 20 years since the establishment of OTSI. So we draw upon various sources, including the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. So the Australian Transport Safety Bureau is the national safety investigator, particularly in aviation. You see quite a lot of their activities in aviation, but they also do maritime and investigations in rail. So we work with them. We have an MOU with them, and we exchange information, and we share some of our systems and processes for consistency reasons and for also best practice reasons. I mean, ATSB are the signatories to the global conventions on maritime and aviation investigation. So through that process, we absorb those approaches. So where our investigations are solely about incident prevention, we do not apportion blame or liability. And we're even under the law in New South Wales, we can't name individuals. So we can't name individuals in our reports. There's a couple of different flows in the process. The main thing is in the center of that, where we do a safety factor analysis, where we look at the particular occurrence and we look at causal factors, and we establish a bit of an operating hypothesis, and then we test that to make sure we've identified the various contributory elements. So the benefit of our approach is we look at avoiding the sort of reductionist or the one cause type view, and you might see that happen, you know, in the old aviation accidents that used to happen. You'd go, "Hey, pilot error, you know, nothing to see here," you know, and then people walk away. So really, this is about going through an appropriate root cause analysis to understand, okay, the worker in this particular instance may have violated a procedure and caused something to go wrong. What is it about that procedure? You know, did they know about the procedure? Were they trained appropriately? Were they competent? Was the procedure even workable? And then if it wasn't workable, how did we end up with an unworkable procedure? Was there a lack of consultation? Was there risk assessment wasn't effective, as the case may be? So it's really about getting through the chain of events in a reasonable amount of depth to understand what the significant factors were. And then the graphics team got a bit excited with that one. So ineffective risk controls are important. So some of the key questions is humans do things. So one of the key questions is, why did it make sense for the individual to do what they did? So, you know, people are not out there, they don't go to work to create a major incident. So what is it about that person, and what is it about the environment that influenced that person? So how did the systems of work that they're operating under affect their behavior and their performance? So it's looking up beyond the individual and back into the systems and processes of the organisation, and even beyond the systems and processes. So we go into the regulatory environment and say, well, okay, what is it about the regulatory environment that might have influenced some of these issues as well? And the point we're making here is that human error and rule violation, that's the starting point of the investigation. That's not the end point. So safety factor maps. So there's a few different investigative techniques you can look at. So this is one that the ATSB and ourselves have adopted. So really what we're doing here is looking at the technique of, as I was saying just earlier, looking at identifying the various factors that may have had an influence in the incident. So these are factors that play out. There's the occurrence, of course, but these are what individual actions, local conditions. We classify, I'm going to move around a bit, which might not be good if you're online, but hey. These what we call below the line are the local conditions and individual actions, and above the line are more the organisational and environmental type issues. So we look at putting quite a lot of attention in terms of understanding how this process worked and how this created the environment for this to play out. So it's not really about what happened down here, but it's about how this caused that to happen down there. So it's unpacking and understanding that. So I won't go over that because I've just talked about that. So what we end up doing is putting together a logical construct So you have something that's gone wrong, and then he says, as he moves over to the other side of the screen, you have those below the line and above the line events and behaviours, and we look to logically connect what's a contributing factor, what's a non-contributing safety factor, because we can identify safety factors in an incident that might not have contributed directly to this particular incident, but point to a future vulnerability. So they're just as valuable because they might not be relevant today, but they'll be relevant tomorrow. So unpacking that in a logical sense and also creating the opportunity to test all of these. And we have quite an extensive validation and peer review and testing process to make sure we've captured all the contributory factors. So why we do them? So it facilitates the analysis of the causal change. We can build the logic, and it allows cross-checking of all our findings. So at the end of an investigation, and we can look at the analysis, and then we can use that to justify our findings. It probably doesn't surprise you to hear that when there is a significant event, there's a lot of concern amongst the parties that were involved. Although it's a no blame investigation, people are protective of their reputation. So they come out pretty hard, and we engage quite significantly with the directly involved parties. So we go through the drafts with them, and we go through a finalisation process with them as well. So we need to make sure that the recommendations we have are pretty solid, because they'll be challenged at every point. And it's understandable because my reports go to the minister, and the minister then must publish those reports or must table those reports in both houses of the New South Wales Parliament within 7 days. So other states' ministers have more discretion about what they will or won't publish. It's not the case in New South Wales. So the clock ticks the minute I hand it to the minister. So they're made public, and then once they're tabled in Parliament, I back that up with messaging, more industry messaging. So the parties involved in an incident, they know what's happened. They may have even taken action to prevent it happening again, but the rest of industry doesn't necessarily know that. So we've got to communicate that more broadly and get people to understand that there are lessons here that you are applicable to you. And the other thing that we learn is over the years, the safety science approach between different transport modes has converged. So there's a lot more common language now. So something that happens in one industry is directly applicable. So something that happens in rail can be directly applicable to the bus industry or to the ferry industry. So there's a lot more commonality now and a lot more opportunity to share. So the thing I wanted to touch upon is investigative techniques. You can debate techniques. There's a number of different approaches. There's academics have done a whole bunch of stuff about how to investigate these sorts of things. But the challenge is more what to investigate rather than how. So there are many incidents. We get 500 around about 500. Usually 500 is the lower end. So we get over 500 notifiable occurrences every year. So they're events that are serious enough that they need to be advised immediately to the relevant regulator, and then we get them. So the other thing to bear in mind is we're not operating in a vacuum. There's other parties that are doing investigations as well. There's police, industry regulators, worker health safety regulators, the coroner as well. Transport agencies can do investigations, and the businesses themselves that have been involved. So we're operating in a big ecosystem. So the issue is we might not be the appropriate person in every instance to investigate, depending on what's happened. The other challenge is that where there's a fatality involved, there's always pressure from the family or the media. So why aren't you investigating my particular incident? So any investigative agency, regardless of whether it's we're investigating these kinds of incidents or you're investigating financial fraud or you're the ICAC, there is a limit on your resources, and you need to triage things and identify what you're actually going to investigate within the limits of what you've got to work with. The other issue you've got is, depending on the nature of the incident, the information is unreliable. In the first instance, there are, as Tasha said, I've been in the role since September 23. We've had a number of incidents where you get major crisis, panic in the streets, blah, blah, blah. It's a total disaster. And then it starts to walk back. And then you find out, oh, someone grazed the knee. You've gone from multiple fatalities. So working within that initial period of uncertainty means that we sometimes go through a process of, we can immediately initiate a full no blame investigation. We can review, as I mentioned earlier, something that someone else has done if we feel that's more appropriate. We can take no further action. We can look at something, we collect the data for the purpose of future analysis, but we don't take any direct action, or we can take a combination of the above. So sometimes we start here and go there if we're not satisfied, or we can go there and then discontinue if we find that the incident wasn't as significant as it was initially portrayed to be. So we triage every notification. I have 2 meetings a week. I sit on those meetings. We look at every one of those 500 notifiables with my full team. So it's not something I do alone. And I have a view that everyone in the team needs to know what is in the business of OTSI. Now the team is 32 people, so it's not, ginormous, but everyone needs to know what is going on in terms of safety and what incidents that we're looking at. So as I've said there, we're looking at incidents that have the highest potential to deliver the greatest public benefit. So we look at it from the point of view of investigate, learn, prevent. So these investigations save lives because they identify safety improvements which prevent future trauma. So we take that very seriously. And there's some factors that we take into account when we're considering an investigation. So, looking at severity, looking at the potential for safety learnings, looking at, there's a cold, hard reality of resources, and there might be other elements to do with public interest. The other thing you need to bear in mind is I am independent in terms of my decision making, but the minister can ask me to investigate any incident the minister sees fit. Now, the minister can't tell me how to investigate, but he can tell me to investigate. So that's a factor you need to consider as well. So summary, I think Tasha covered it well, AI covered it well in terms of the benefits, but we think they provide opportunities because they look to identify system improvements. Human error is the starting point, not the end. And then you need an appropriate tool like the safety factor map to keep your investigation on track and to make sure you followed an appropriate, solid logic decision-making process that is defensible, because you will be challenged. And we are challenged regularly. And if we're not challenged directly, we're challenged indirectly. I'm continually getting gippers and then there's, with a lot of these incidents, there's a follow-on court process. So we get subpoenas quite regularly to people seeking information, because what we find is that because we're not all of us involved in the ecosystem are investigating at the same time, when someone's looking for evidence about a particular event, we might have information, or police might have information, or other parties might have information. So you end up with the people involved in these proceedings looking to get it wherever it's available. So sometimes that causes a bit of a burden. And decisions on which incidents to investigate, as I said, they're not always clear cut. There's a period of uncertainty, and there's also very fine margins between various decisions about what you investigate. I tend to think about it in what you would call a pairwise comparison. I sort of look at it and I think, there's a potential to investigate that. Is that more important than this? Is that more important than that? So trying to get a positioning for a relative positioning in terms of the significance of an incident for investigation. So anyway, I know I've had to blast through that, but I certainly appreciate your patience. If you want to contact us, we have a website newly refreshed, so you can access even more information than you could before. And you can also subscribe to our channels and get information when we publish reports. We're also active on LinkedIn. So yeah, if you want to find out more, that's where you can find us. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. That was terrific. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. We'll get to questions shortly, so keep those in mind. I'd like to now welcome Inspector Jason Hogan to come up and speak to us. Inspector Hogan is the Crash Investigation Unit Commander for the New South Wales Police Force. He joined the New South Wales Police Force in 1991. He carried out most of his service as a detective, being promoted to Detective Senior Sergeant, leading major investigations and homicides. Inspector Hogan was a tactical operator for the State Protection Support Unit for 25 years. In 2021, Inspector Hogan commenced duties as Inspector of the Crash Investigation Unit. During this time, he oversaw and implemented the 2022 functional review of the Crash Investigation Unit and modernised their standard operating procedures. He is responsible for the policing activities into serious road crashes across New South Wales and the staff that undertake those investigations. Thank you, Inspector Hogan.
As it was outlined, Jason Hogan from the Crash Investigation Unit. I actually come under the auspices of the Traffic and Hire Patrol, with my commander in the back there, Superintendent Boyd. So the Crash Investigation Unit, we investigate really serious crashes that involve death or serious injury. Unfortunately, we have been to numerous jobs this year and in the past years that I've been with the Crash Investigation Unit. So we've got a staffing level of 64 across the state. So we've got 64 officers that cover 8 officers, and we've got those in positions that can readily respond to crashes across the whole of New South Wales. Our criteria is death or serious injury resulting from a motor vehicle crash. Now, that could also lead to speed, drugs and alcohol being involved, where the driver flees from the scene and we don't know who the driver was, or that the people at the scene can't identify who was at fault. We also investigate matters where a police vehicle or a police officer was involved in a crash, and also any crash that the commander of the Traffic and Hire Patrol deems fit. So I've sort of wear 2 hats there and juggle, is this going to be politically sensitive? Is it going to be media sensitive? And deploy to a job that might not be within our criteria, but for the interests of the police force and the state and the people that are involved, the Crash Investigation Unit will take carriage of it. We have a mandatory reporting regime for all fatals. So 24 hours a day, I have a sergeant rostered on, and they answer the phone for every single fatal that occurs in New South Wales. We might not go to that particular fatal, but the sergeant will provide advice and guidance to the staff at the scene to ensure that the best possible outcome for that particular crash is reached. That may be giving some advice and guidance. It might be in a couple of days or weeks or months providing expert advice to ensure that the coroner is satisfied that New South Wales Police Force have investigated that particular crash and death to its full potential. So as I said, we've got a sergeant that's rostered 24 hours a day. They're not in the office, but they're on call. And most of our office work is that on call after hours duty. So an officer might start work at 6 o'clock, finish at 4, go home, 25 minutes later, they're on the road, and 7 or 8 hours later, they're finishing work. So the Crash Investigation Unit's unique organisation within New South Wales Police. We're the only unit that investigates or carries out their duties from the initial responding to a job, to its investigation in the field, to its prosecution at district court, and or to the coroner. We also assist the local PAC and PD detectives with what we call an intention offence, so it's where someone's used a motor vehicle as a weapon. And unfortunately, that happens far too regularly. And we also help PACs, PDs and State Crime Command when an assistant commission is deemed a motor vehicle crash to be as a result of a critical incident. So there's been some type of police involvement that may or may not have led to the death of an individual. And we provide expert advice and guidance to those investigators to carry out that investigation. It may lead to either criminal and or coronial investigations. In 2022, I carried out a functional review of the crash investigation unit, and we've streamlined the call-out process, where we've got staff stationed throughout New South Wales. We actually created 2 new offices. We closed one in Bathurst, and we opened one in Dubbo and one in Riverina, Wagga Wagga. Just allows us to be more flexible with our staffing to deploy to greater areas of New South Wales. You can imagine the map of New South Wales. We've got Wagga Wagga and Dubbo, and then we've got a long way west and a long way north. So we have to have that flexibility in our locations, and because of the training and the expertise that the staff have at the crash unit, we need to be able to deploy. Sometimes we deploy in vehicles. Sometimes we use the services of Pole Air to get us. We might send one officer in Pole Air to the scene, and then we'll send another officer because with weight limits in our equipment, and then we'll send another officer to catch up with them in the car. We're also heavily reliant on our forensic investigation service. They've got digital laser scanners that are hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment that they roll out, and they can 3D laser map a scene for us. You need specialist training for that as well, so we rely heavily on them to map our scenes, for want of a better term. In relation to our other equipment, we've got drones. We call them RPAS, Remote Pilot Aircraft System, and they're CASA accredited, all our pilots under the RPAS system, and we can video, photograph, and do some mapping with those drones. Our training, so in 2022, with the functional review, we also looked at our in-house training, and we created a position of a training and development sergeant. So being a specialist unique office, to run a lot of courses and to be fiscally responsible, we need to use that budget wisely, and we weren't doing that. So we've now got a training sergeant, training budget, and we can make sure that the staff get the training that they need. And we also realised that we couldn't complete the credentials for the Diploma of Crash Investigation Unit, which is an ANSPAR qualification. And we sat down with ANSPAR and with the other states and territories, and that course has been rewritten, and it's now functional for Australia and New Zealand. Well, I think that's a great achievement. Sure that our staff get the training and the expertise and guidance that they can. New South Wales Police also have set up the Australian New Zealand Crash Investigation Board, and we meet every 3 months on Teams, and we discuss issues that's happening around the states and territories and New Zealand. And we find that everyone's got the same issues, the same problems. But we're going to use that as a tool. So if we've implemented something and it works, we can share that with other states and vice versa. If we find something that's not working, and we can have a look at that and change our systems. Because crashes across Australia and New Zealand generally they're very, very similar in their cause and their nature. I've teed up with the Road Trauma Support Group that's sponsored by the New South Wales Government, and I attend their meetings once a month. It's a very, very good group of unfortunate people that have had someone that's close to them die in a motor vehicle crash. They've been a very vocal opponent of legislative change, and I'm more interested in the welfare and support that they're giving their families. At the moment, I'm sending out letters to every single person that we deal with in relation to our jobs. So if there's a victim or unfortunately deceased, we do with the senior next to kin, we send out a letter to make sure that they've got an initial point of contact with the officer in charge as soon as possible. And due to our workload, there are times that sometimes we just can't get to the people to when we want to get to them or when they need to be spoken to. So we've set up a smack box, and I monitor that regularly to ensure that if anyone is putting their hand up because they need some assistance or they want to talk to the police, that if the staff are not there, I can guide them to other people, so we can make sure that they might have that one question that they just can't get to sleep about. So we can find them a little bit of respite, give them the answers that they need. That's working really, really well. Staff welfare is a huge issue for crash unit. Our staff undergo what we call a well check. They sit down with a psychologist every 3 months and just debrief. It's a good opportunity for them to get something off their chest if they want to. And we really encourage them to be frank, honest for their own mental health, their longevity within the police. And it's a good gauge on how we're travelling, that our sick leave and the people that are off on long-term sick, such a high risk and a trauma. Every single job they go to is traumatic, and we've not lost too many officers. Losing one is too many, but we are handling that workload very, very well. In relation to our workload, we average about 330 jobs per year. That's not all fails. Majority of those would be grievous bodily harm. We also provide assistance to the PACs and PDs when they just need a sounding board from someone that has got some specialist advice and guidance. We're also heavily involved in community engagements. So we are proud partners with the Be Street Smart campaign. And over 3,500 children in New South Wales attend that event. We've also rolled that out in Tamworth, and as of last year, we started one in Dubbo, and we're redoing the Dubbo one again this year, and we've got 3 more schools, and we're looking at having 800 children go through that program over 3 days. So that's a really good community engagement that we have with them. I was sort of saving my time up for some questions, but thought there'd be more questions and I could get out as a quick spiel. I did have a little bit of a presentation, but I need to be very careful with what I put on a screen, as in facts and figures or just vicarious trauma. It's always on the news, but I don't know who's in the audience. And we have some unfortunate large-scale crashes and highly publicised, and I just didn't want to put anyone in that position. So I was saving my time up for questions, but we can go on to the next presenter, or I can answer some questions. However, you'd like to.
Up to you. Did anyone have a burning question for Inspector Hogan that you'd like to ask? Hey.
Keith Simmons from Australians. Jason, thanks for that. You currently investigate to find who caused the crash. Are you also able to do a safe system investigation to find why a crash resulted in a fatality and make those recommendations to the relevant road authorities, etc.? Because currently that's a big weakness in our system, that feedback loop.
Yeah, as I said, we approached ANSPA and Safe Systems has now been included in the Diploma of Crash Investigation. So it wasn't something that investigators knew of, Safe Systems, but just having that Australia, New Zealand base, we've come together and worked on that, and Safe Systems are now part of that course. We also do regularly contact local councils and Transport for New South Wales in relation to intersections, roads that are not what we would call fit for purpose. There is a particular stretch of road that had 2 trucks crash on. One was a fatality. We rang up Transport for New South Wales and we requested that some variable messaging boards were put up. So all my investigators are very mindful of, we're not only investigating the crash, but how to prevent further crashes in relation to that. Also, we make recommendations to the New South Wales coroner So that's every single time there's an inquest, the officer in charge will give a recommendation as to what they believe was the cause of death, and if there is any systems that could have been used or should be implemented, we can give that advice to the coroner.
Thank you. Did anyone have anything else at this point, or should we come back to Inspector Hogan at the end?
Yeah, just a quick one because it's a bit of a lot of the vehicle safety standards are more in the control of the federal government. Do you have any feedback loops to pass on any of the findings from your safe system investigations to the feds?
I know there is a working party from federally in relation to ACMs, airbag control modules, and they're downloading and reporting back to states and territories and the Australian government. I sat on a working group in 2024, but that hasn't really gone. I don't know what the federal government's doing in that space, but it is something that really needs to be looked at to ensure that the vehicles that are rolling out are fit for purpose in Australia. Problem is that we bring a Kia into Australia and it's not a ADR requirement for the airbag to be downloadable, which causes us a lot of grief because we have a number of systems and components that we can plug into some vehicles. But as you can imagine, with Tesla and all the other new vehicles, we can't download a Kia or a Hyundai. That forms probably a third of our police fleet. We have to send that away to a third party to have that downloaded because there's no ADR to say that you must provide state government and territory the ability to download that as it is in America. I think they're looking at an American model.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Inspector Hogan, I'm sure there'll be more questions. I'll now call on Emma Shearer. Emma is the Director, Data Advice, Research and Testing at Transport for New South Wales. So Emma is a data professional who bridges the gap between IT and operational and business units in data-driven and information communication environments. The current team is responsible for collecting, managing and reporting road safety crash data for New South Wales. Emma was involved with the initial work on the regular linkage program between police crash reports and hospital admission data, enabling New South Wales as a leader in serious injury data. Emma has been at Transport for New South Wales for 12 years and was with the RTA and RMS for 11 years before that. So she certainly has had a lot of hands-on crash coding way back at the beginning and has a long history with this topic. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you for getting that technical glitch out of the way. So I didn't have to. Thanks. So I'd just like to add my acknowledgement to the fact that we're on the Gadigal, lands of the Gadigal people here. And Mick did reference at the beginning of the night that Aboriginal people are overrepresented in crash data and trauma data. And later on in this presentation, I will touch on how it is that we know that as well. So this is a 10-minute crash course on crash data. That was a bit of a pun that I didn't expect to do, sorry. But crash data is that we collect here in transport is a very different beast to what the police are collecting in their crash investigations. The first being that our crash data does not include any concept of fault. Thank you for the question, Keith, about the safe systems approach, because that is how the crash data that we collect is formed. And we look for the contributing factors that may overlap and come together that may have contributed to a crash happening, or if the crash has happened, what has influenced the fact for it to become a fatal or a serious injury. So we treat our data quite differently. It does come from police. The police report is the foundation of our crash data. But we're a crash investigation unit at doing 300 odd crashes a year. We have to code up around 20,000. So very different level of information and work that goes into it. But we do look at a range of things. As I said, all of those different contributing factors. So we look at behavioural aspects of people involved. We look at the environmental and the hazardous conditions, and we do look at all the features or failures of the vehicles. The crash data, as I said, begins from the police report. So that is our foundation. This is where we get all of our intel. And we use a whole bunch of coding standards and guidelines, some business rules and logic, and sometimes just case-by-case discussions amongst our team of experts, applying practices, coding practices to new situations. Start with a couple of basics, the data definitions. What is a crash? According to the guidelines that we use, a crash has to be reported to police. It has to have occurred on a road that is open to the public at that time of the crash. It has to involve at least one moving vehicle, road vehicle, result in at least one person being killed or injured, or one motor vehicle being towed away. So we do capture non-casualty crashes if they are reported to police. I will say that the reporting to police factor is becoming somewhat of a limiting factor. Many years ago, we had a lot more crashes reported and less people are reporting those lower order, lower severity crashes through to police these days. We do use these national guidelines. These criteria are a national guideline. However, there are differences in the way that the states apply these rules, and everyone in different jurisdictions have different methods of collecting and different capabilities to collect data. So if you are doing any research at a national level, you should probably look a bit closer at what data is available state by state. Just looking at the crash coding process in New South Wales, as I said, it all begins with police. So once a crash has occurred and been reported to police, we might get the police attending the crash, taking their notes and writing up a report, or it could be an involved party who ring the police assistance line and report that crash in order for them to get an event number, perhaps for them to take to their insurance company. The crash coding process is really, therefore, a very collaborative process. So we rely on the police to send that through. Fatalities are always advised to us the next day. As soon as the Highway Patrol Intel Office has a police report, they will send it through to us. And regularly, on a weekly basis, we get the non-fatal crash reports coming through. We also have a partner in this process, it's the Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. They're a fabulous NGO and a disability employer, and they have a fabulous data team that works through this data. They code up all of the information that we receive from police. I'll show you a little bit more about that later on. The process, however, isn't quick. And it can take about 5 months to get through the process, right from a crash occurring and police capturing the reports and it coming through. We often get multiple reports over time as information is collected by police. And so we don't code them instantly. As soon as they come through, we give it time. And that, therefore, that 5 months is enough time for us to capture a whole bunch of information about the crashes. And it's about that point where we say a period of time for crashes is complete. So we do release our data regularly every week for analysis and reporting purposes. within transport. But we wouldn't say, for example, a quarter is complete enough to be used for trending purposes until about that 5 to 6 month mark. It's at that point that we send it off. And we send off the personal information to New South Wales Health, who attach that to that personal information from the people in the crashes to hospital records. And that's what allows us to determine the severity of the injuries that were as a result of these crashes. And I will talk a little bit more about that. This whole process, as I said, it does take a significant amount of time, and each quarter is matched to the health data at least twice before we consider it final. And this is why it's at least that 6 month kind of period before we consider data is complete, and we don't actually complete a calendar year until around the October sort of time frame. So 2024 data is still considered preliminary and subject to change at this point. Uh-oh, I broke it. There we go. Okay. Apologies. This is what our crash coders will see. This is the type of information that we get direct from police. This is the free text narrative that an officer has typed up, and these are the kinds of information that we are searching for. One day AI might be able to pull that out for us, but at this point we use people, and they look for things like any of the kinds of hazardous features or factors that might have occurred around that vehicle as it's become involved in a crash. We also, as part of this process, we pull out location information, information about the environment, whether it was raining, any information about the vehicles that the police have told us. And also this is where we get out the information about the drivers or the motorcycle riders and any casualties involved in the crash. Some of the other things that we are looking for as we code up a crash are these behavioural factors. Now, this can involve drug and alcohol use, and that's quite definitive. That's something that we can collect once we match up the results from breath tests and blood tests. We can look at things like seatbelt usage and restraint usage. It's not always possible to tell, for police to tell whether a victim, a driver or a casualty was wearing their seatbelt. But in motor vehicle occupant fatalities, we only get about a 20% unknown rate in seatbelt usage. So this kind of information is fairly robust, and we can collect it from the police reports quite well. Some of the other things that are a little bit more difficult to tell are things like speeding and fatigue. And for these, we have a set of business rules where we look at all of the lead up to the crash and the type of crash, and that's what we use to determine whether there was speeding. For example, speeding in our definition is excessive for conditions. It might be over the speed limit if that the speed of travel was known, but it could simply be loss of control on a bend. According to our business rules, if there are no other factors that have been identified, our system will work through a number of questions, and a loss of control on a bend is potentially a speeding crash. Likewise, fatigue, some of the key criteria that the business rules look for is a vehicle that leaves the road on a straight or onto the outside of a curve if there is no other reason that they might have done that. All of those full definitions are available. That's quite transparent and public, and you can look those up on our website if you wish. One of the other main categories that we use in the crash data is what we call this road user movement, or a RUM code. It's a really useful way of grouping up crashes by the manoeuvres of the vehicle as they got into the crash. As you can see, we've got there's 86 different codes. Some jurisdictions use a different version of this, but this is the one we use in New South Wales. The reason I brought this one up is because we were talking about fault earlier, and I said that we have no flag for fault in the crash data, and the key in using a RUM code like this, the vehicles in the impact get assigned either the key vehicle or the other vehicle. And the colours of the arrows that you can see there represent either a key vehicle or the other. And a key vehicle is defined as the vehicle that performs the manoeuvre. And quite often people will use this data and assume that key vehicle is the one at fault. And we do need to be quite clear that that's not always the case. The example that I always use is this one in the bottom right of the call out. You might think that the right turning vehicle was at fault, but perhaps they had a green arrow. And the oncoming vehicle actually ran the red light. So it's not always that case. The brown numbers at the top of these boxes, by the way, they count the number of crashes, number of fatal crashes that have occurred of that type in 5 years. So serious injuries. We know that we want to reduce serious injuries as well as fatalities. We have government commitments to do that. But some years ago, we didn't have any way of measuring that. We don't actually get a lot of information from the police report about the severity of the crash. So police might tell us if an ambulance came, but we don't necessarily know if they took away a casualty or if they treated someone at the scene. So this is where our health linkage process comes in. And as I said before, we send away our data quarterly, and we send it away after about 5 months when we get a complete quarter's worth of information. What happens when we send it to New South Wales Health is they do a linkage across all of these different data sets. So other data custodians send their data in as well, and we link, we get back effectively a linked up record that contains information from our own crash data, the emergency department admissions, we have CIRA, compulsory third party claim information, we have the actual admission to a hospital for New South Wales and ACT, and we have ambulance information as well. And this breadth of data tells us a massive amount of information about the injury and the trauma that has occurred as a result of these crashes. I should probably note that a serious injury in our definition is a person who was admitted to a hospital on the day or the day after a crash with injuries. I also wanted to point out here that this is also because we have this much wider pool of information. This is the data that we use to identify Aboriginality. The breadth of the data that we have here gives us scope for us to collect records where someone has self-identified in any of these sources as being an Aboriginal person, and we're not simply relying on a police report or perhaps only where they've come to a registry and noted it on their driver's license. So we have a much more a wider view of Aboriginal identification, and this, we believe, is giving us a much more robust level of understanding about the amount of Aboriginal trauma on the roads. So I'm just going to leave you with this one slide as well. This is a little bit complex, but this explains what we get back when we get back all of that health information. So not only do we get back the flags and the linked up information against our crash data, but we also get back all of information where the hospital has recorded a person has gone to hospital, they've been admitted to hospital, and they've said they were involved in a crash, but we can't find the linkage to a police reported crash in our database. So what we have here is our serious injuries near the top of the screen in the middle there, but we have two pools of that, and that is where we have serious injuries matched police reports, and we have this group that is serious injuries not matched to police reports. And together we tend to refer to them here as all hospitalisations. And what that tells us is that around 50% of serious injuries are not being matched to a police report. So it really highlights to us there is a pool of trauma that's happening out there on the roads that we just don't know enough about. So I will leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alice. Yes. So last but not least, Julie Brown. Professor Julie Brown heads the injury program at the George Institute for Global Health in Australia. She's co-director of the Transurban Road Safety Centre at NeuRA and professor of the School of Population Health at UNSW. Sounds very busy. Her career vision is to reduce the health burden attributable to injury by developing tangible ways to prevent and mitigate road crash-related injury and unintentional injury more broadly. To achieve this, she works across the continuum of the public health model, from defining problems, identifying risk and protective factors to developing and evaluating prevention measures and improved trauma management processes. I think we'll hear more about that in a moment. Julie has worked for more than 30 years in road safety as an academic researcher since 2025, a consultant from 1998 to 2005, and for the New South Wales government. Welcome, Julie.
So I think I'm really going to be talking about this from a research perspective, I guess. And I'd just like to start with this slide, which many of you, I'm sure, recognise as it comes from Transport for New South Wales. And what it does really is highlight the significant successes we've had in road safety over the past few decades. And as you can see, these successes have largely been driven by numerous effective countermeasures that have been introduced in New South Wales since the 1970s. And I think it's really important to remember that most, if not all, of these initiatives have been developed based on, at least to some extent, some form of crash analysis or crash investigation. So no blame crash investigations and analysis have really actually been central to road safety and countermeasure development since the very beginning. And while road safety efforts probably began a bit earlier, for example, with public education campaigns that were introduced in the 1950s, it was really in the 1960s that we saw this shift towards evidence-based road safety actions, and crash investigation and crash analysis really have always been at the core of establishing this evidence base. So we had landmark crash investigation studies, and by crash investigation, what I'm talking about is on-scene investigation, researchers turning up with the police for the purposes of road safety research. And we saw these studies commencing first in 1962 in Adelaide with Jack McLean's group, and just a little bit later here in 1966 when Michael Henderson established the Traffic Accident Research Unit here in New South Wales. And these in-depth crash investigations have really continued right through the 70s and 80s, and even to more recent times. They do continue to this day in Adelaide in a more routine way, but in other states they've been more targeted, and probably they've moved from what was proper on-scene crash investigation early in the 60s and 70s to more retrospective crash investigation. So I could talk about this a lot, but we don't have a time for that today. And instead, what I'd like to talk about is this public health model, which is actually really similar to what we all try to do in road safety, which involves firstly trying to define a problem, and then identifying risk or protective factors, and then developing some countermeasures based on that knowledge, and then implementing and hopefully evaluating after they've been implemented. And crash investigation and crash analysis and the data that Emma spoke about, as well as in-depth crash investigation, has historically been used and can be used at almost every time point along this continuum. But as you've heard from the earlier speakers, there are different types of no blame crash data, and it's really important to consider what type of data is most appropriate depending on the research question that you're interested in, the level of scientific evidence that's required, and where along the continuum you're working. And we need to be mindful of important limitations that are often associated with the different types of data that sort of come about because of the differences in how they're collected. And we always need to keep that in mind. And actually went ahead a bit too quick then. So we can sort of think of crash data as existing a little bit on a spectrum of increasing level of detail as well. From administrative crash data sets, like Emma was telling us about, to in-depth crash data sets. So like what Jim was talking about, and what, the on-scene crash investigation and retrospective crash investigation type studies can tell us. And so we can see that the sources of this data and how we get the data is very different. So administrative crash data, as Emma was talking about, are often compiled from police reports and hospital records, while in-depth crash investigation involves a much more detailed process through examination of the crash scenes, the vehicles, the injuries, and interviews with the people that were involved. And so these different methods of data also constrain the different types of data that's available. So administrative data relies on secondary sources, but it often represents every case in a population, while in-depth crash investigation has a lot of fine detail, but there's usually some convenience sample that's involved. So these differences really can influence the data quality, and also the sort of bias that's introduced by the different samples. So what I'd like to just do briefly is go through these different types of crash data and how they're used at different time points along this continuum, or different points along this continuum. So if we start with surveillance and defining a problem, we commonly use administrative data sets in descriptive studies for monitoring trends and examining questions like who's crashing, when are they crashing, where are they crashing. And because they usually contain the whole of the population or near to a whole population, they can tell us something about the relative size of the problem, which is important for priority setting. But there are limitations. So we still have difficulties establishing risk from these data sets, because we don't have really good exposure data, for example, for different pockets of the population. We also have to assume that they contain high quality data, but this can't always be assured because it's secondary data. And as Emma said, there's always some degree of underreporting. And because there's a limited amount of data that we get through these administrated data sets, there's some specific details we might be interested that are just never going to be available. For example, if the crash was actually a frontal impact or a side impact, for example. But in contrast, crash investigations really can help us to identify the really explicit causes of crashes or injuries, and they can reveal system level problems or problems with products or problems with vehicles. And we can use them to pinpoint the exact target that we need in countermeasure development. But because these are generally, a convenient sample or not a representative sample, they tend to require additional analysis or further broader crash analysis or sometimes laboratory testing. So they're more like hypothesis generating exercises rather than definitive evidence producing types of investigations. And although, like Jim was saying, they can show us problems that need to be remediated, and we can take action to address those problems identified, that they may not capture the full range of related problems simply because they're only a sample, a convenient sample of crashes. So the next point along the continuum is really the most crucial one for developing solutions or countermeasure development, because it's here where we try to understand risk factors and potential protective factors. And looking at the two different types of crash data, administrative crash data sets are really have been commonly used in things that we call case control studies and cohort studies. And historically, the main limitation for identifying risk factors in using this sort of data set is that single data sets don't usually involve the full sets of variables that we might need to identify risk factors. But more recently, there's actually been quite an explosion in the use of these approaches because of the varied types of data sets that we can now link with the crash data set. For example, we just recently received some funding from the Federal Office of Road Safety to link the UNSW MedIntel data platform with Emma's data. And this MedIntel data contains PBS information, for example, so that we can now really, in a rigorous way, have a look at prescription medicine use, for example, as a risk factor, which we haven't really been able to do before because we didn't have the know-how about how to really properly link data. But we still need to remember that there's still going to be potential limitations, even when we use these big powerful data sets. And for crash investigations, from a scientific perspective, probably the most common way we've used them is in what we call case control studies. But these really need careful design and implementation to overcome the problem with bias in sampling. And the number one problem is that because of our privacy laws and ethical guidelines, we have to ask people if they'll take part in the study. And so you always get an inherent bias because some people will say no, and they may be the most important people to have in the study. And it's also really difficult to construct appropriate control samples. But it's important to note, I think, that even if we can't do a crash investigation case control study in a really scientifically rigorous way, they really can tell us really useful, detailed things about likely risk and protective factors. But as I mentioned, with defining the problem, we usually then need to go on do some other sort of work, maybe in the laboratory in crash simulations, crash testing or something like that, to actually deliver good quality evidence. And then finally, we can also use crash data to evaluate the effectiveness of different countermeasures once they've been implemented. And crash investigation data is not usually appropriate for this from a statistical sense because of the sampling, but it would be, in theory, if we could appropriately construct and power a sample, it would be possible to do this. On the other hand, more census level data like EMA's data, particularly linked to other data sets, can be used for this, and we can use fairly rigorous analytical methods such as interrupted time series analysis and even simulated randomised controlled trials if we had the appropriate data. So I've just kind of thrown a whole lot of stuff at you, and I would really have liked to have been able to take the time to show you some different examples of different studies, but the kind of, I guess, key thing I'd like to say is that I think there's a couple of issues that, so I think we should definitely keep crash investigation and the use of crash analysis as a key tool of road safety research, but we should, going forward, look at some key issues that kind of limit what we can do, such as lack of exposure data and the establishment of appropriate sampling frames for in-depth crash investigation studies, for example, to try to overcome some of these long ongoing issues with bias and confounding. So sorry if I've gone too fast.
All good.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We've had some fantastic things to think about from all of our speakers. I might engage with our online community now and throw to you, Cass. Dr. Cass Gould is up in Newcastle and she's a member of the New South Wales Chapter Committee. Cass, you've been looking at the online questions. Would you like to tell us, bring a few forward for us?
Thanks, Tasha. Yes, and thanks to all our fantastic speakers tonight. What a fantastic array of insights that you've given us. I have a question here for Jason from Adam. Sorry, Adam, I'm not sure how to pronounce your surname, but I think you're from Central Coast Local Council, if I remember correctly. Has there been any movement with New South Wales police investigators working with local government to get improved determination of causes? And he's just commented below that you can't do complete investigation due to state of mind, behaviour, etc., all the unknowns.
Jason, if you speak up, everyone will be able to hear you.
We're a little bit limited as we're prosecuting an alleged driver for an offence, so we can't release information until it's determined by the court, and in a fail, it can't be released until it's released by the coroner. We regularly deal with the TMC, with local councils in relation to risk mitigation that we see. If we believe we do a Vericom friction testing, which is the road friction test that we've got the ability to do in our cars, we'll get onto whichever organisation looks after that particular roadway, and we'll let them know, well, your road friction values are too low, and then it's up to the council or the TMC to address that issue. But that'll all be in our report to both areas of the court process, both inculpatory and exculpatory evidence. So we put all that together. But yeah, our problem is that we're bound by the jurisdictional responsibilities that we have and we carry. We would love to share them as soon as we get them, but I think that would be a utopia moment that would persist everyone. But yeah, we're bound by what we can and can't release.
Thank you.
I can expand on that, Tasha. Every fatal that we have, a traffic inspector being the most senior sort of highway patrol person in a geographic area will do a review of every fatal.
they will do that with a road safety officer from council or a council representative or a Transport New South Wales representative. And that's to look at causal factors on the ground at that point in time. And that could be sight distance where they need to trim back vegetation that's overgrown and is cutting back sight distances. It could be visibility to a stop sign or something like that. So that's done pretty regularly and it's done for every fatal. So we do look at it pretty comprehensively on the ground immediately after, and there's channels for that information and those results to feedback through the local council or road management group that's relevant to that area.
Right, thank you. Thanks for that answer. Cass, did you have another one?
Yeah, I've got another one here for Emma from Max Cameron. In the definition of serious injury, does this include treatment in A&E or does it require formal admission to hospital?
No, it's formal admission to hospital.
Okay.
Presentation in emergency is what we call a moderate injury.
I imagine it's quite complicated getting that. Yes.
Yeah, it can be.
Thank you.
Cass, were there any others?
Yeah, I have just one more. I don't want to take up all the time with the online, but a question for Jim. Does the safe system approach directly influence how you carry out individual crash investigations? For example, in developing hypotheses and safety factor maps? And that's from Linda Ferguson. Sorry, I don't think I said that.
Well, the short answer is yes, because the safe systems approach is a entirely logical and appropriately structured way of thinking about safety. So yes, we look at that and we refer to that, and there's the road version and there's the maritime version. Rail doesn't have a version, but it has a slightly different approach to safety management systems. But yes, we're cognizant of all of that and do take that into account.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone from the floor? We've got a few minutes if I can go slightly over 6:25 if anyone has another question. Or the speakers? No? Okay. Yeah.
Might as well ask one of them.
Bernard, why not?
Right.
It's a bit of a irony, really, of course, which is sort of clearly the linking of data and information systems is critical to the sort of future endeavours of, and so I thought it'd be useful for Emma to talk a little bit about the other safe system data sets that are being linked to the crash data.
Sure. So as part of that whole linkage, yes, the health data, the hospital data in particular, was the first focus of what we were linking to the crash data. But we are expanding that out to look at sort of a broader view of all the different aspects that we can link. So we are linking the information that we have from driver licensing systems. So the offences that people have, the licensing process that people have gone through, also the vehicles that are registered or not registered if we don't have the registration, but where we have the information, the safety features that would be standard on that style of car. So all of that kind of aspect, trying to really flesh out the people, the vehicles, as well as the environment, and the star ratings on the roads as well.
Yeah, and I'll just say that we're also talking with Emma to actually take that and add even another level of data, which is data from the census, so that we can look at person level sort of socio-demographics as well, which will be really cool.
Yeah,
if we can get it to happen, because
we can work out the ethics.
And particularly when you can add in like the pulp data, so you can get all of the vehicle technology level information as well. That's kind of what we're hoping to do as well.
That's in there.
Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic. Well, what a terrific conversation. We've definitely brought out many important issues to consider here tonight, and I think we can clearly say we've met the AI challenge. Here in New South Wales, as of this morning, 178 lives were lost on our roads so far this year. Fatalities over the last decade are not trending down. Over 10,000 people were seriously injured in New South Wales because of a road crash in the last 12 months. So the quality of our crash investigations, the collection and analysis of crash data is critical to understand the most effective approaches to reduce road trauma. Clearly, effective road safety reform starts with the quality of these crash investigations. And I'd like to thank so much, and if you'll join me in thanking our wonderful speakers, Jim Modrouvanos, Inspector Jason Hogan, Emma Shearer, and Professor Julie Brown.